in the second panel discussing the multifaceted revival of Islam, which is a kind of ambiguous title, because in fact we will not be speaking about Islam as a religion or Islam as a practice. We will be speaking more as Islam as a kind of cultural background that is permeating a lot of economic and cultural sectors in Uzbekistan, and which is kind of this cultural background on which the country is now trying to build something. So we will be looking both at what the role or the place of things related to Islam or to Islamic heritage of Uzbekistan, and how it can influence economic growth in the country, for example, pilgrimage, tourism, or female entrepreneurship. But we will also see that there are a lot of debates on issues concerning the re-traditionalization of the Uzbek societies, especially the question of women's veiling, the status of women, and as you may know, as in the rest of Central Asia, but especially in Uzbekistan, during Karimov time and now during Mirziyoyev time, the authorities are always ambiguous on what they want to promote of Islam as a kind of cultural heritage, and the fear they have of Islam as a kind of fear of Islamism as a political ideology or violent extremism. So we'll be looking at this kind of two contradictions on the way Uzbekistan is interpreting its Islamic past. And it's not only an ambiguity that the state is having, it's also something that is highly dividing the society, and especially now that there is a growing liberalization of speech in the Uzbek society, you can notice that debates about the role that Islam should occupy in the public space is a rising one. So we will have four speakers, and we will begin with Donohon Abdugafurova. Donohon is currently a PhD student in the Islamic Civilization Study program at Emory University in Atlanta. Her research interests are related to gender, Central Asian intellectual history, Sufism, women literature, education, and ethics in Uzbek society. And during her time here at GW, she researches women's religious identity and the relationship between the state's secular tradition and these issues of women reveiling. So Donohon, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Marlene. Thank you so much for everyone for being here in this afternoon. Let me start my topic with an anecdote, personal experience. In 2009, when we were moving from Namangan to Tashkent to start a new chapter in our life, we were taking the belongings in a van, hiring a driver. And then on the way, the policeman stopped the driver and wanted to see what was inside this van. And among the things that caught his interest was a book that's written in Arabic script. And then he started to questioning the driver, and not knowing how to read the book, driver said, "Oh, I'm nobody here. Like, I'm just taking this professor's belonging, like, don't question me." And then the police, who doesn't know how to read, assumed this was the book that's related to Islamic literature, could be forbidden in Uzbekistan. And unfortunately, this was the book in Uzbek language, but written in all script. So this was the kind of situation where anything related to Arabic script or anything related to Islamic literature was kind of feared. And in the context of the comparison, recently changes became so much easy the situation, and then Islamic revival started in another level where with the new administration talking about Islam or the manifestation became much more relaxed after the 2016 with the arrival of Ziyarah. And here at JW, I'm looking at this Islamic identity, and then because of this easy talking or the openness to Islam, kind of the public space was opened up to the religious identities manifestation, like having the hijabs or having beards were kind of being seen, and this was in a very speedy period that showed the different change. And then not only in private places, we also see the public women's wearing hijabs in schools and other places. So here at GW, I'm focusing on the discussions around of manifestation of religiosity, especially the nuances of wearing hijab at the crossroads of Uzbekistan secularism and then the manifestation of religiosity. Through this research, I argue that the government is trying to kind of finding a balance between the state's position to Islam and then the people's acceptance of Islam. So Uzbekistan's position has been really very harder in terms of the regulating, and then this in previous administration the state was not comfortable with the non-conforming forms of Islam. So with this new current administration kind of changed the discourse, and they were kind of encouraging this Islamic identity and allowing the Quranic recitation competitions and then the prayer calls, and this kind of religious expressions became prevalent. And the discussion of hijab turned into really why in 2018 in August, when the new decree was admitted for school uniforms, in the 7.7 of this decree indicates that students are not allowed to have any hats, and then because of the Uzbekistan is a multi-ethnic and multi-religious country. No any religious indications of religious elements like hijab, kippah, kashaya, and cross are allowed as a part of school uniform. This is the statement from the decree. And then the point that we see, there is not much of a question of these religious elements, but the issue became the hijab issue. The government is banning the hijab. But literally the decree does not single out the hijab, but lists as one of the elements that is describing as the religious element. The document does not state religions by name, but indicates by elements and refers to the diversity of religions within the country. And the hijab issue became the vital part to kind of express people their own voices. And men are discussing on this point, women are showing their expressions in the social media or in other mediums, and for example, Telegram groups and Facebook groups, they do kind of share their views on this. And sometimes they do bring up this document and they say government is banning, and then the other side says they don't mix up the secularity with the religiosity. There's nothing wrong with this statement. So there's the diverse opinions emerging in these places. And then when you look at the answers from women's voice, I'm looking at the women's perspective on this hijab issue, we can kind of categorize their intentions, motives that kind of motivates them to take on a veil. Before, if we kind of relate the religiosity with older generation, now it's becoming the issue of more like the younger generations are involved in discussion of the wearing hijab and intentions of wearing hijab. And then they do kind of take the reasons as modesty or piety or even beauty reasons, fashion reasons. For example, when they explain why they want to wear hijab, some say it's the spiritual quest that they want to overcome within themselves. And then for the others, it would be the increase on righteousness and the piety that helps them to elevate their moral standing, and then they also see they're superior to the ones who don't wear. So they do consider themselves in moral hierarchy holding the upper position if they compare to their peers. And then others says, I'm wearing the hijab not to wearing hijab makes me be thankful and more beautiful, and this kind of changes my personality toward myself, because I see myself more beautiful if I wear the hijab. So this kind of narratives give the perspectives of different types, and also among women they do share this. We need this control. If we don't have this control, they would be Islamism take control, so there would be difficult consequences of this uncontrolled Islamic movement or the expressions. So in the brief conclusion, so the government is trying to find the common ground that does not want to hurt people's feelings, also kind of wants to bring up recognizing the plurality of the voice within the country, and then try to kind of recognizing the possible threats that would pose as a fundamentalism or Islamism or the holding into secular values, because Uzbekistan positions itself in this case of secularism where it defines as protecting the multi-religious, multi-ethnic population of the Uzbekistan. And would it be possible for Uzbekistan to compromise for this, providing relief to both sides? In order to find some compromise, I propose following recommendations. Before giving the recommendations, I also would like to highlight that the fear and cautiousness that Uzbekistan is not ungrounded, because the experiences from different places show that once the requests are given, the answer, there would be no guarantee that there would be much more demand. For example, in the case of Belgian Port City, the high school allowed the hijab, and then at the end, like from time passing, Islamists started to question not only after the dressing part was taken care of, they started to question the curriculum content, and then the co-ed situations, and then also, the parent-teacher conferences where both gender would be present. So this kind of situations always put the government in a cautious place. In terms of recommendations, I would list them 3 of them here, and then first, the hijab thing hijab has to be described, and what does it mean in the context of Uzbekistan? Does it mean, is it the important identity as they see it, like the Turkish model, or is it Saudi Arabian dress code, or is it the one version of traditional one? What is hijab? And then when they document or when they have policy to make it, it is allowed or it's banned, they have to separate this distinction between traditional headscarf or the hijab, so there would be no much distinction between state is intruding to this even dressing level of the women, so to the level of absurdity. So in order to prevent this, there has to be definition of the hijab, and then creating working groups to study the experiences of other countries where the Islam as a major religion is recognized, but they claim to be secular. So the experiences of Turkey, Malaysia, and Indonesia could be useful in establishing the common ground in Uzbekistan. And then the third one would be developing the para-school teachings, after-school teachings about religion, because considering the secular nature of the school curricula, classes on religion has to be introduced as after-school programs, and then this would give some relief and then venue to seek for more religious knowledge, and there would be a response to that. And that's all. Thank you, and look forward to the questions.
Thank you so much, Donohon. Let's continue on issues related to women's rights and status in the Uzbek society with our second speaker, Nozimakhon Davletova. Nozima teaches at the University of World Economy and Diplomacy in Tashkent. She also leads there the Lab of Negotiation, and she has she's a PR manager of an NGO which unites about 200 compatriots abroad to work on development strategy for Uzbekistan. But she has been also a very active journalist. She set up an online interview project at Gazeta.uz, which is one of the main Uzbek newspaper. She conducted several videos and interviews with foreign experts and Uzbek government officials on higher education, finance, environmental sustainability, water management, and modernization of the public sector. And during her time here, Nozima decided to work on the status of women in the Uzbek societies and the gap between what is written in official documents and the realities on the ground and the challenges that poses to Uzbek women. So Nozima, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to see you all here. And you know, I didn't know how cool I am until I heard the introduction. Why women? Why the women's issue, the gender issue, to talk about when we have so many other issues and the gender issue is just part of it. You can think so, and many others in Uzbekistan also think so. But as I see it, is that the women's issue is a perfect litmus test for the ongoing transformations, economic, social, cultural, legal transformations in Uzbekistan, in every society, in every other society. Women suffer from economic hardships more than others because they just need to overcome the basic fundamental challenge, and then also the challenge of poverty, of the decline of social protection, which happened during the past 3 decades in Uzbekistan. The social relations has changed both in families, within families, and outside the families. So the role of women has changed a lot. It is challenged, it is revisioned. So we can now say that the re-traditionalization of the Uzbek society, the growing religiosity in the Uzbek context is affecting a lot women's roles, individual, social roles, and this also affects the economic factors. So the main focus of my research here is the discrepancies between the state gender policy and what is actually going on the ground. Why I'm looking at this topic? Because how usually a state articulates the women's issues, the gender issues, is everything is almost perfect. There are some problems, they're not critical, they can be overcome, and all this stuff. But in international indexes, in international ratings, the situation is not very good. And Uzbekistan is rather low in the women's gender index, according to World Bank, according to UNDP, and other international institutions. So as to clarify the dimensions which I was going into, I divided my research into 3 dimensions, which I'm going to delve into. These are legal, education, and cultural dimensions, and to find out the discrepancies in and among them regarding the state policy, gender policy. So let's start by the legal aspect. The legal system is, I see it on the ground, it reflects, mirrors the actual discourse, demotic people's discourse on women and their role. Fundamental gradual change in the society affected women's roles, as I said, and they are reduced mostly to household roles. Their role is seen in the society mostly as mother, wife, daughter, rather than a professional, rather than personality that has their own ambitions, professional career development. Women are today deprived of legal property, legal rights for property. Actually, it is in the constitution that everyone has equal rights for property, but according to the traditional views of women and men, and in a very patriarchal society, women's share in property ownership is about 20% out of the total. The family code prescribes equality among men and women in their families. And also the issue of property in the marriage. But the problem is that the majority of women, when they get divorced or they just make an attempt to get divorced, they're usually forced out of their houses, of husbands' houses, because they don't have a registration, propiska, and they don't have any legal rights to claim for roof on the top. They are either not protected from the domestic violence, because the domestic violence is not criminalized in Uzbekistan. So this gives room for maneuvering for the representatives of law enforcement bodies. And according to my survey that I've conducted on the domestic violence, some representatives of mahalla or local community, or the representatives of law enforcement bodies could say even like, no body, no case. So until you're not killed by your husband or by your family members, you cannot claim a case. Article 2 of the Family Code also says that women and men have equal rights in families, but women are usually deprived of their right to get divorced. And this happens even in the cases when women suffer from domestic violence. This happens mostly due to the efforts of the government bodies to hide the true statistics on divorces. So women are mainly subject for this kind of manipulations of statistics. Another issue is that women usually subject for forced use of contraception. This is informal directions from the government in order to control the birth. This is on one hand, but on the other hand, women are exposed to their traditional roles, so that they need to bring children, the more, the better, and preferably sons. Poor paid sectors and gender biased sectors such as healthcare, education, cultures, sometimes sports, and less represented in this kind of and well-paid sectors such as construction, finance, and even agriculture. Girls are invested much less because they are perceived as those who go outside the parents' home, and they are mostly involved in household activity. They bring children and they have no opportunity to work, to earn money, so there is no need to invest in girls' education and future career development. Regarding the cultural setting, I was mostly focusing on domestic violence. Just imagine, there was a report, a shadow report by the international project, which was conducted in Samarkand and around Samarkand in very remote areas. It revealed that actually what is perceived to be a domestic violence towards women. Usually women do not consider as domestic violence the ban to go outside alone, or to go to visit their parents, or to go to the university. It's not considered as violence. What is violence for Uzbek women in remote rural areas is beating, coercing, rude attitude, and all this stuff. So this means that the culture of violence towards women in particular is very normalized in society. So they don't even report, they don't even think that this is something abnormal. And my survey, which I have conducted with about 90 people in online platform and on Facebook in a group against violence, it revealed that 60% of the women never reported on domestic violence because of various reasons, such as lack of trust to the system, lack of trust to the representatives of law enforcement bodies, lack of knowledge, fear of contamination, shaming. And regarding the shaming tactics, it's very widely used by the mahalla, local community, in order to deprive women the desire to proceed for reporting to law enforcement bodies on domestic violence or even proceeding to divorce. So for these reasons, I'd like to make some recommendations, which are they are actually complementary to what is going on the ground in legal sphere. So we have draft laws on domestic violence. It's not still criminalized, and it is not proposed to get criminalized, though. There is a draft law on the elimination of all kinds of discrimination towards women. So my recommendations are basically complementary to all these measures. These are designed a nationwide publicity campaign using TV commercials, videos, billboards, which would highlight family relationships more egalitarian type with imagery of working and educated women. The campaign should promote egalitarian form in order to show how relationships can work within the family and how the families themselves could benefit from this. Hold interactive trainings for law enforcement bodies with an emphasis of role playing, so that to evoke some empathy and zero tolerance towards violence in families, so that they can push the case against the abusers. To introduce the Institute of Mediation for Families, as the previous survey showed that Mahalla is not really managing the situation. It's very good at managing to concealing the problems, but rather than fixing really the problems. The Mediation Institute should be based on NGOs, and the approach of the professionals should be mostly within deep knowledge of Islamic theology, which is very important in a society with growing religiosity. And the last one, to create domestic violence resource network, so that to connect the victims of domestic violence, to connect the international organizations, non-governmental organizations, health organizations, in influential individuals, so that they could create some ground for fixing the problems with peaceful means, and to create some more methods and research regarding this issue. And one of my grand strategy of communicating the issue is to introduce some of the Islamic feminism into the discourse, into the public discourse, because otherwise we cannot empower women in the society, so that we need to do it within the context which is very popular in Uzbekistan. And but not really labeling it as Islamic feminism, because feminism is not perceived in a good way, in a positive way in Uzbekistan. And finally, the discrimination has no race, ethnicity, or religion. It actually has the context, the social context. And we just need to comply with some universal human rights issues and human rights development, which a gender issue is definitely part of it. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you so much, Fatima. Let's continue on issues related to women and their rights with Fotima Israilova. Fotima is, I think, our youngest fellows ever. She earned a BA from Westminster International University, which has been I think, the first international university open in Tashkent, and a very prestigious one. And she now works for the United Nations Development Program in Tashkent. And during her time here, Fotima has been looking at female entrepreneurship and the challenges and limits that they are facing in current Uzbekistan. So Fotima, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for having me. So let's start with this little introduction of my dreams. I always had a dream to open my own business, and I always wondered the question, what comes to people's mind when they think the term entrepreneur? People usually say it is a man who is very ambitious, who is very optimistic, who is a risk taker. But the global statistics on the McKinsey shows that by increasing female entrepreneurs rates, 28 trillion of dollars can be added to the global GDP. This sum of money is equivalent to what US and the China economies are doing today. So women can be a cornerstone to eradicate the rule of poverty, food insecurity. And in the case of Uzbekistan, it is a very pity to see that only 10% of women are engaged in female entrepreneurship. So, at the current moment, the population of women are 60 million. So out of these 60 million, only 10% of women engaged in the female entrepreneurship. Here at GW, I looked through the specific barriers that impede women full participation in the business. So the first barriers that women face are the cultural pressure. The law on the eradication of all forms of discrimination usually argue that women and men have equal rights and prohibits any kinds of discrimination. But in the reality, the role of women are usually interpreted in patriarchal terms, and women face the challenges with the stereotypes. They cannot lead the business, they are not good enough to be the entrepreneur. And the ADB project concluded that the women have very high rate of self-esteem, very low rate of self-esteem and doubt. If we take into the consideration the level of educational attainment, we can see that the gender parity index shows that over the last years of the independence, nothing has changed, and it remained the same. 61% of women get the higher education, while 38.2% of women in the tertiary education. And moreover, good education in Uzbekistan is highly fee-based. And this means that families give more priorities to men than women, and they think that women cannot bring any benefit to the family, and this is the biggest problem too. And moreover, I think that the curriculum of higher education has not been adapted to the needs of the labor market of Uzbekistan. Existing educational programs are not well linked with what the key priorities of Uzbekistan today. And as a result, women face challenges in the low-paid positions. They are majority in education, in the social work, and they are less paid than men. And unemployment rate keeps growing, and the women are struggling to make ends meet. And the biggest problem is access to credit. ADB project have made the research along with the World Bank and concluded that in the Central Asian countries, Uzbekistan still have problems. Uzbek women are not empowered at all in terms of access to credit, and they made studies in Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, and Tajikistan. And interesting point that Kazakh and Kyrgyz women are more empowered in terms of a financial terms. So if to be more specific, females often cannot open their business due to high rates of interest rate, income tax, and the high taxes on the customer taxes on imported goods. The second point that the world average of a microfinance institution's interest rate is 35, while in Uzbekistan it makes up 80. So this leads to the fact that the women cannot open their business, and only 1% of a population can obtain the credit in rural areas. Despite that the men and women in Uzbekistan are guaranteed to have a full rights in ownership, women face problems with having lack of a collateral because the majority of properties like equipment, cars, and the vehicle that they have are registered to men's name, and women have serious problems with that. And all this is a very visible fact that the value of a woman is very low in Uzbekistan, and only 22.3% of all property recorded with the National Registry and Cadastral System. So, based on these elements, I would like to recommend several suggestions. Yeah. First of all, it is needed to establish consultation centers where women will be able to get the legal advice on how to, for example, how to open the business, what kind of rules, what kind of labor law, property, bank accounts, problems, or the rights they may face. Apart from this, it is very important for the women to invest in the business education. So first of all, I think that women should know the basic fundamental financial knowledge is needed to improve. I mean, they need to know how to save money, how to borrow them, how to invest. And women are also needed to empower in the decision making. So there is a need to have mentors who can educate them in the business world. For the microfinance opportunities, I think that there are several special products can be created in the microfinance institutions and the banks. For example, there is a need to reduce or even eliminate the rate for the collateral. I think that there is a need to decrease the interest rate. And we can do this with the help of the success stories in India and South Africa. They use these cases and they see the biggest investment opportunities, and there is a high level of 6% of women have returned their repayment loans in the India and South Africa. So there is twice more opportunity that they can open their own business. So there are a lot of recommendations that I can propose, but due to the time limit I cannot, but you can see this in my paper. That's all what I wanted to say.
Thank you so much, Fatima. And let's now move to another aspect of the Islamic cultural background of Uzbekistan with Surayyo Usmanova. Surayyo teaches public international law and international tourism law at the University of World Economy and Diplomacy in Tashkent, and she also leads the Council of Youth Scientists for International Law faculty in Uzbekistan. And during her time here, Surayyo has been working at exploring opportunities for Uzbekistan to develop what is called Ziyarah tourism, that is a kind of Islamic or Muslim-friendly tourism, and how it could help both to develop tourism in Uzbekistan, but also help integrate Uzbekistan into the international community and especially the Islamic one. So Surayyo, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. And let's use Islamic potential of Uzbekistan and develop its economics, as you mentioned. In Islam, Ziyarah is a form of pilgrimage to sites venerated figures such as the prophets, Sufis, and Islamic scholars. In short, it is a visitation to holy places. Traditionally, Islamic pilgrimage is usually associated with visiting two main holy places, Hajj and Umrah. Nowadays, Muslims all over the world, and especially the supporters of Hanafi madhab, tend to combine tourism and pilgrimage in their destinations. And by 2017, the number of Muslim tourists amounted to 131 million in the world. And by 2020, this number is expected to reach 160 million. And consequently, the turnover from this number will be $300 billion by 2026. This is a huge market for Uzbekistan, and which Uzbekistan could benefit from. The country hosts important touristic Islamic destinations as Bukhara and Samarkand, and this country possesses unique historical and cultural heritage of destinations which are included in the UNESCO's heritage list. And of course, the names of such great figures as Imam al-Bukhari, Azam-Akshari, Bahauddin Naqshbandi, and Tirmizi are well known not only in the history of Uzbekistan or Central Asia, but in many Muslim countries. Yet, to develop Islamic pilgrimage tourism, Uzbekistan should improve several numerous aspects of tourism sector. And that's the topic which I devoted my research during my fellowship. Since December 2016, from Mirziyoyev's presidency, more than 50 legal norms have been adopted in the field of tourism, and this sector became the strategic sector of economy of Uzbekistan. And for the topic we discuss, several steps have been done already. The first one was the introduction of visa-free regime for 64 countries, among them the Muslim countries as Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, and Turkey. The second one was the introduction of pilgrim visa, up to 2 months, who want to make pilgrimage in Uzbekistan and learn historical, cultural, and religious potential of the country. And the important one was the introduction of halal into catering and restaurants in Uzbekistan since February 2018. However, Uzbekistan is not yet well known in the world as an Islamic pilgrimage destination country. According to a survey in 2017, only by the Center for Business and Tourism Development, only 2% of visitors in several months want to make pilgrimage in Uzbekistan. In my research, I analyzed two main aspects: how to develop Ziyarah tourism or Islamic pilgrimage tourism in Uzbekistan. The first one is concentration on cooperation with important regional organizations as a framework to promote Ziyarah tourism. And the second one is reorientation of tourism resources by making halal conditions for Muslim tourists who come to visit Uzbekistan. First point, the regional cooperation dimension. The promotion of Ziyarah tourism has been featured in several bilateral agreements of Uzbekistan in recent years. For instance, the bilateral agreements with Pakistan, with Indonesia, and Malaysia have been adopted on organization of pilgrim tours to Uzbekistan. According to the statistics, the majority of tourists who come to Uzbekistan are from the Commonwealth of Independent States, not from the Muslim countries. I thus worked in my fellowship during my fellowship on developing a strategy to reinforce Uzbekistan's status as Ziyarah tourism destination. In the framework of both the Organization of Islamic Cooperation and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. The first, from the perspectives of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, we should mention that this organization is the biggest organization, which consists of 57 Muslim countries, and has already developed its roadmap on Islamic pilgrimage development in Muslim countries. And this organization, working closely with this organization, Uzbekistan could increase the flow of tourists from Muslim countries, from potential Muslim countries. In terms of Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is nowadays with the Muslim majority and Muslim minorities, we could say. Of course, India and Pakistan, and China and Russia. It is known that China is considered to be a key country for the expansion of tourism worldwide. And so here too I looked at the legal agreements on how to develop Ziyarah tourism in the framework of Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And the second issue I looked at my research is the organization of special conditions for Muslim tourists who come to visit Uzbekistan. The Uzbek, and briefly we could call it as halal conditions, or Muslim-oriented conditions for Muslim tourists. Halal means permissible from Arabic, and the halal concept usually applies to both food and all daily activities of Muslims in accordance with Islamic tradition, with Islamic law, Sharia law, and traditions. And we should mention that since 2000 till 2017, the Uzbek government has afraid from Islamic extremism and terrorism, and does not pay attention the development of Islamic pilgrimage tourism in Uzbekistan. And therefore, there are very few places, the special Muslim-friendly infrastructures in tourism destinations in Uzbekistan. Halal tourism should be developed according to international standards, and here it should be used the best practices of Muslim-friendly tourism developed countries as Malaysia, Indonesia, and Turkey. Now I would like to mention some recommendations to Uzbek authorities to develop Ziyarah tourism. The first one is to sign Memorandum of Understanding with the Organization of Islamic Cooperation on development of Islamic pilgrimage tourism in Uzbekistan. And in this document, it should be mentioned about the organization of internal working group with the representatives of governmental bodies and officials. And the second one is the adoption of roadmap in the framework of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization on the development of specific types of tourism, where Ziyarah tourism also should be included. From the perspectives of Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the organization of non-governmental cooperation between the tour operators is also very important. And with this regard, I suggested to organize the Union of the Association of Tour Operators of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. From the perspectives of halal conditions, it should be adopted a decree of the Cabinet of Ministers on establishment and measurements of halal into catering, and this document should include to improve the institutional framework, training the qualified personnel, and of course certification and requested infrastructure in country. And last but not least is, as I've mentioned before, the promotion is the most important factor in tourism. And the organization of special Islamic promotion centers under the embassies of the Republic of Uzbekistan in prospective Muslim countries would be the important step in developing this kind of tourism. And in conclusion, I would like to emphasize that these all initiatives, reforms, and suggestions serve to develop tourism and consequently economic growth of the Republic of Uzbekistan, and to create employment niches in provincial regions and sometimes in rural areas, and increase the country's prestige abroad. Thanks for your attention.